Tonight, still more compelling evidence in the House January 6th investigation, including proof of Trump's reluctance to condemn the rioters and new testimony signaling new progress in the Justice Department's investigation into the insurrection. Then, are those cracks in the cozy relationship between the former guy and conservative media? Plus, as gas prices drop, the president predicts no recession. Whether there is or not, will Americans ever buy what he's selling? We'll ask a member of his administration as the 11th hour gets underway on this Monday night. Good evening. Once again, I'm Stephanie Ruhle. A top Trump White House insider has now officially appeared under oath before the federal grand jury investigating the Capitol riot. Tonight, we learned Mark Short, chief of staff to former Vice President Mike Pence, has cooperated with the Justice Department's investigation into the attack.
I can confirm that I did receive a subpoena for the federal grand jury, and I complied with that subpoena. That was my only appearance before the grand jury.
NBC News reports Short testified on Friday. He would be the highest-ranking former Trump official known to have testified before the grand jury. Short was by Pence's side as the mob overran the Capitol and called for the vice president himself to be hanged. Short also testified before the Jan 6th committee earlier this year. The Wall Street Journal and New York Times reporting Pence's top legal advisor, Greg Jacob, has also spoken to the grand jury. He was also a witness at a January 6th hearing back in June. And today, the January 6th committee is out with new evidence. You'll remember last week, the panel released video of Trump the day after the riot, refusing to say that the election was over. Well, today, committee member Elaine Luriel released previously unseen evidence of Trump's resistance to condemn the rioters.
Do you recognize what this is?
It looks like a copy of a draft of the remarks for that day.
Okay. And as you can see throughout the document, there are lines crossed out. There are some There's some words added in. Do you recognize the handwriting?
It looks like my father's handwriting.
It looks like here that he crossed out that he was directing the Department of Justice to ensure all lawbreakers are prosecuted to the full extent of the law. We must send a clear message, not with mercy, but with justice. Legal consequences must be swift and firm. Do you know why he wanted that crossed out?
I don't know.
Earlier this evening, Luria spoke about the significance of this new information.
This gave additional detail about, what went into the speech. It's really enlightening to me, the parts that he crossed out. And we wanted to make sure to share that information because it provides amplifying details on what we shared in the hearing.
Meanwhile, the AP reports the committee wants to interview more Trump cabinet members, and they may also be preparing to subpoena the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Ginny Thomas, as you recall, is under scrutiny for her role in pushing to overturn the 2020 election results.
We want to have a voluntary conversation. Just come on in. She said, I think somewhere in the media, that she was eager to talk to the committee. That's it. Come in, let's talk. If we need a subpoena, we will. But we prefer, obviously, to just find out what she knows.
As for Trump, he has not been in Washington since departing on January 20th, 2021. Tomorrow, he returns to our nation's capital to speak to the America First Agenda Summit. With that, let's get smarter tonight with the help of our leadoff panel. Yamisel Sindor joins us, NBC News correspondent and moderator of Washington Week on PBS. Neil Katyal, Department of Justice veteran and former acting Solicitor General during the Obama administration. He has argued dozens of cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. And Robert Gibbs is here, former Obama campaign senior advisor and White House press secretary. Mr. Katyal, I've got to go to you first. What do you make of this new testimony? It's not to the Jan 6 committee. It is to the grand jury.
It's a big deal to me. So the grand jury subpoena means that that there's evidence relevant to a criminal investigation, and they've called in top White House officials, 2 of them, not random insurrectionists or anything like that. And it's a subpoena. So it's not some nice request from prosecutors, Stephanie. It's more than that. And these subpoenas, to me, are a very strong indication that the Justice Department probe is advancing. And Merrick Garland has been moving slowly in the investigation, but this does show movement. And let's hope that this shows that these steps show that Garland is going to basically prove to us that slow and steady does win the race. And why this is different than the past. We've known that there's a grand jury investigation going into the fake electors plot in Arizona. We know that there's a grand jury investigation into insurrectionists at the Capitol, those relatively low-level people. But what this is a request about stuff going on in the White House around January 6th. And both Mark Short and Greg Jacobs have given testimony to the January 6th committee, and we all saw it. It was live, a lot of that testimony, about just how crazy this plot was and Trump's aiding and abetting and encouragement of it. So all of that's now being teed up, presumably, to the grand jury. It's a big, big deal. In ordinary times, the idea that a White House official would be brought before a grand jury is big, huge news. We're nerd to it a little bit just because we hear so much about Trump wrongdoing and so on. But this is a very substantial step.
Yamiche, you've covered the former guy for quite some time, and we have seen it time and again. When someone speaks out against him who was part of his circle, he always says, they're a coffee boy, an errand boy. I didn't know them. They were irrelevant. Short and Jacobs, how significant are they? How senior were they, at least in the Mike Pence world?
They were incredibly significant and incredibly senior in the Trump White House. Of course, Mark Short was his chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence. And before that, he was the legislative affairs liaison for the Trump White House. So he was the face of the Trump White House, going to Congress, negotiating with lawmakers. So this is someone who is very familiar with former President Trump. President Trump could not begin to even try to lie about the fact that he doesn't know Mark Short and that Mark Short wasn't in incredibly important meetings. I think what's important about who Mark Short is and sort of the world that he's coming from is that the vice president's office and Mike Short himself, they've not wanted to talk about January 6th too much. They've not wanted to sort of focus on it because Mike Pence has been out there wanting to talk about inflation and sort of criticizing Biden. But when you ask Pence people, including Mark Short, about January 6th, they don't hold back. Mark Short has been very clear, and I talked to him last week ahead of the January 6th hearing personally. He's been very clear that the January 6th that the Capitol riot was a shameful moment, that it was wrong, that the vice president had never had any sort of power to overturn the 2020 election. And he really understands the danger that Mike Pence was under and what it meant for a crowd that was already chanting "Hang Mike Pence" to then get a tweet at 2:24 from former President Trump on January 6th saying that he was criticizing Mike Pence again while he was being evacuated. So apart from the sort of knowing what the danger that Mike Pence was in, he's going to be very familiar with the pressure campaign that former President Trump was putting on Mike Pence, because he would have been not only in those rooms, but he also would have been, along with Greg Jacobs, they would have been the people who were counseling Mike Pence and really understanding sort of the position that the vice president was in. And they came away thinking that it was untenuous and that what President Trump was asking Mike Pence to do was simply illegal and not something that he could do.
Mr. Gibbs, let's talk communications and impact. We know there is huge interest in these hearings when you look at the viewership numbers from last week. But this new video that was just released tonight, clearly the committee is trying to keep public interest up. You think it's working?
Oh, absolutely. I think the hearings have become must-see TV. To your point, Stephanie, each and every day something new comes out. I think a lot of us, myself included, were worried that we knew most of what we were going to know about the days leading up to and that day of January the 6th. They've kept the tension going by entering new evidence, new witnesses into this discussion. And look, they announced that as the hearing concluded last Thursday, they already announced more hearings, which means more people are coming forward, more people are testifying, more people are telling stories. So if you were thinking about this as a TV show, and I know Donald Trump is, the plot thickens, the season goes on, and there's no doubt we're learning more, they're learning more, and it's creating, again, must-see TV for people to watch throughout the fall.
And we're watching what the committee is finding. We cannot see what the Department of Justice is doing, and that's where the real impact is. Neil, our friend Andrew Weissman tweeted this. Trump false statement on January 7th. Quote, I immediately deployed the National Guard and federal law enforcement to secure the building and expel the intruders. Proof positive that he had zero intent to stop the insurrection as he was all for it succeeding. These are Andrew's words, Neil. Do you think he's right?
Yeah, I think that in conjunction, by itself, maybe not enough, but in conjunction with so much other evidence, absolutely. I mean, a federal judge has already looked at this and said it's more likely than not that Donald Trump has committed 2 felonies on January 6th. And then the evidence today that you were referring to at the top of your show, Stephanie, about Representative Luria showing that, Donald Trump struck out of the speech on that day, January 7th, a line about how the rioters would be prosecuted, and tellingly struck out a line where Trump would have said that the rioters did not represent him or his movement. They wanted that out too. And if you just take a step back, it's really startling to think about how Donald Trump, just 24 hours after this violent mob storms the Capitol, is sitting in the White House editing his speech, and he's not trying to find the words to mend our country or our democracy. He's just trying to make sure he doesn't offend the rioters. Trump's dedicated more time to line editing his speech to appease the rioters than he did to soothe the country. And so I do think all of that's relevant when we get to that question of criminal intent, which no doubt the Justice Department is starting to think about.
But he didn't pardon any of them, which is forever interesting to me. Yamiche, President Biden said something today that we don't often hear. He called out Trump for lacking the courage to act on January 6th. That's somewhat rare for the president. He doesn't talk much about January 6th. He leaves it to the committee and others. But here we are. Trump is showing up in D.C. tomorrow for an event, and Biden's calling him out. Are we going to expect more of that?
Well, I think what we can expect from President Biden is to really, I think, hammer home the point that he believes former President Trump is a danger to our democracy, that he failed to act on January 6th. In fact, that he's poured gasoline on a hot burning fire that became a deadly fire and that people were killed during the Capitol attack. President Biden, when I talk to White House officials, is really trying to have a balancing act here, right? He wants to make sure people understand that he's as angry as most Americans that see former President Trump as problematic and dangerous, but he also wants to, of course, be seen as someone who's focused on the issues of the day, including inflation and abortion politics and the pandemic and so many other things that he has to deal with. So I think that it's a rare moment for him to call out President Trump, but it also shows that he understands that in this moment, as millions of Americans are watching these hearings and learning new information, that he wants his voice to be part of that. So based on my conversations with White House officials, I don't think we're going to hear from him say this every week, but you can imagine that this will not be the last time that he'll be calling out former President Trump about January 6th.
Neil, I cannot let you go unless we talk a bit about the Secret Service controversy. I want to share what committee member Zoe Lofgren said earlier today.
I'll tell you, I have a concern about the Inspector General as well. Why did he wait months and months and months and months before telling us some of this, that these texts were erased?
What should the committee do next, Neil?
I think they've got to call in all of these Secret Service top officials. They've evidently lawyered up with private lawyers. They're not comfortable with the Justice Department lawyers representing them, which to me is a pretty scary sign. Normally, you use the Justice Department lawyers when you're a former official. Usually, you don't use them because they're excellent lawyers. So the real reason not to use them is because you're worried you're going to have to tell the Justice Department something that you don't want to tell them. So there's something going on here that's really bad. And Congresswoman Lofgren is referring to the Inspector General also looking like part of the problem. Since IG knew about this starting in February, that person is supposed to be an independent watchdog